The roast had barely been set on the table when Nolan walked in, late again, with Kara behind him and Sharon trailing as if they were the homeowners. I'd set the plates out early, ironed the napkins. My hand had trembled a little when I poured the iced tea, but I told myself it was just nerves. Not the Parkinson's. Not yet. Nolan didn't look at me when he sat down. He kissed Kara's cheek, asked if Sharon liked the potatoes like that roasted, not mashed. I smiled and said nothing. The question wasn't for me. We passed dishes, shared shallow talk. When it quieted, I asked as gently as I could, "Did you get my medication?" Nolan shrugged, reaching for his water. "I got it for Sharon instead. Hers was on sale." My heart stuttered. "You mean my prescription?" He didn't even blink. "Yeah, she needed it more." Kara kept her gaze on her plate. Sharon gave a small, tight-lipped smile like it was all perfectly reasonable. I stood, pretending to clear a dish. My legs moved before I told them to, in the kitchen. I steadied myself on the counter, watching the sink fill as I turned the faucet on too far. The water rushed like blood in my ears. He'd had one job, one small, urgent thing. The neurologist had said clearly no delays. Start the treatment immediately or risk progression. I couldn't even hold a fork last week without it shaking like a leaf in wind. He'd promised. "Don't worry, Mom. I've got you." I looked down at my hands. One was clenched too tight. The other open like it didn't remember how to close. The sounds of the dining room filtered back in, Sharon laughing at something. Nolan's voice, low and easy. My name didn't come up. I turned off the tap, wiped my hands, and opened the cabinet above the fridge where I used to keep extra medicine. Just in case. Empty. I pressed my palm to the cold surface of the door, and it stayed there longer than I meant. I hadn't realized how quiet betrayal could be. After they left, I waited until the house settled into stillness. The kind that wraps around you when everyone who doesn't belong is finally gone. I climbed the stairs slowly, pressing the rail harder than usual. The tremor had returned, faint but steady, like a warning knocking just beneath the skin. I opened the drawer in my bedroom where I kept all my prescriptions. A white-labeled bottle usually waited there, tucked neatly between my lotion and old receipts. Tonight, it was gone. I checked the bathroom cabinet. Nothing. The coat closet. Nothing. Kitchen drawer. Just batteries, pens, and an expired bottle of fish oil. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared down at my hands. Then I picked up the phone and called the pharmacy. The woman on the line was young, cheerful, too cheerful. "Yes, that prescription was picked up earlier this week," she said brightly. I blinked. "I didn't pick it up." Her voice softened. I could hear her tapping. "It was signed for, and the system shows the medication was authorized for use by someone else, under your account." My chest tightened. Was it Nolan? A pause. Then, in a quieter tone, she said, "He stated you gave permission." I hung up. I didn't cry. Not even anger came, just a quiet hollowness. At midnight, I walked past the guest bathroom. The door was ajar. Inside, on the sink, sat a bottle of pills. Not tucked away, left out like an afterthought. I picked it up. The pharmacy label had my name, Odessa Wren, now faded and partially scratched out. Below it, someone had written Sharon in smudged marker. It was sloppy, like the truth often is when people are in a rush to hide it. I stood there a long time with the bottle in my hand. When I finally turned out the light, I placed it gently back on the counter, not because I forgave them, but because I wanted them to see what I already knew. Morning light came in thin stripes across the kitchen floor, touching everything except the place where I stood. The house was quiet. Too quiet, and for a moment, I wondered how long it had been since it felt like mine. I set the kettle on, breathing through a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with age. I reached into the drawer for a spoon, but it slipped from my hand and clattered onto the tile. Not a dramatic fall, just a small noise. Still, it echoed through the house like a verdict. I bent to pick it up, but my fingers wouldn't close around the handle. They shook. Useless and stubborn, I tried again. The tremor spread like a ripple through water. I straightened slowly, one hand gripping the counter until the shaking eased. This wasn't just about a missing bottle. I stared at the spoon on the floor and felt a familiar ache rise not from the illness, but from memory. The night I co-signed Nolan's student loans. He'd hugged me until I couldn't breathe. "I'll pay you back, Mom. I swear." I hadn't asked him to. The day he and Kara moved into the guest room, they'd carried in more boxes of electronics than clothes. "Just until we get settled," they'd said. 10 months passed before they left. When his moving truck broke down halfway across the state, I sold my wedding band, my last piece of Walter, to cover the repairs. Nolan never knew what I gave up. I didn't want him to. I paid for their honeymoon flights, their groceries when money ran tight, their utilities when they forgot to pay, all of it handed over without a ledger, because that's what mothers do. Or at least what I thought mothers were supposed to do, and now I couldn't even trust my own son with a prescription that determined whether my hands would still work next month. I picked up the phone and dialed the clinic. My voice sounded steadier than my body felt. The nurse on the line told me gently that without treatment, the symptoms could escalate, some changes might not reverse. I thanked her and hung up, staring at my shaking palm as the last of the kettle's steam curled into the air, already reaching toward what came next. I noticed it before I even made it to the kitchen. The hallway felt different, narrower, off balance. The antique mirror that had hung there since Walter brought it home from a flea market in 1978 was gone. Just an empty nail and a faint square where the wall hadn't faded. I stood there a minute, staring at the blank space. Then I walked slowly into the kitchen. The counter was cluttered with gadgets I didn't recognize, some sort of juicer, a smoothie blender, a stand mixer that gleamed like it had never been touched. My labeled tea jars, black tea, chamomile, mint, were nowhere in sight. Sharon turned from the sink, drying her hands on one of my good towels. "Oh, I moved a few things to make space. Hope that's all right." I opened a cabinet, found my jars stacked behind a plastic bin of protein powder. "For safety," Kara added, coming in with her phone in one hand. "We just thought it might be easier this way." Easier for whom I looked at Nolan. He stood behind them, arms folded, pretending not to notice. I cleared my throat. "I'd prefer if you asked before moving things." No one responded. Kara scrolled. Sharon filled a glass. Nolan glanced at the fridge like it might save him. The house felt unfamiliar, like I'd stepped into a replica someone else had designed. I thought about the mirror, about how I used to catch glimpses of myself when I carried laundry through the hall. That mirror had seen me pregnant, widowed, laughing, shouting, aging. Now, someone had decided it was in the way. That night, over dinner, Sharon folded her napkin with slow precision and said, "You really ought to consider a retirement community. Odessa. This place is getting too much for you." I didn't respond. I looked at Nolan. He didn't meet my eyes. I chewed slowly, swallowed, and folded my own napkin. Something inside me had been giving and giving for years. That night, it stopped, and the next morning, I found what I wasn't supposed to see. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just doing the laundry because routine keeps the mind from unraveling. Nolan had left his jeans in the hallway basket, pockets still tight with whatever he hadn't bothered to empty. I reached in, expecting loose change or a grocery list. Instead, I pulled out a crumpled strip of paper, thin, soft from being washed once already. A pharmacy receipt. My eyes moved down the print. My name, my prescription, paid in full. and a signature that wasn't mine. For a moment, I felt nothing. Then the knowing settled in quiet, cold. I smoothed the paper out on top of the dryer, my hands steady only because they were too stunned to tremble. After folding Nolan's laundry, I carried the receipt upstairs. I opened the old hardcover on my nightstand, the one Walter used to read during long winters, and slipped the paper between two pressed funeral flowers. Things I'd saved, things that mattered, things that marked endings. This felt like another one. Later that afternoon, I drove to my primary doctor. The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. When he called me in, I told him everything, how Nolan picked up my medication, how Sharon had it, how the bottle showed my name scratched away. He listened without interrupting, his expression tightening. When I finished, he pulled up the medicine's profile on his screen. "This dosage isn't safe for her," he said. "Not even close." I nodded. He looked at me for a long moment. "Are you planning to report this?" I let the silence stretch. It sat between us like a second presence. "Not yet," I said finally. He didn't press. He just printed a new prescription and handed it to me with careful eyes. On the drive home, the world outside the windshield seemed a little sharper edges clearer, shadows darker. My silence wasn't soft anymore. It had become something pointed, honed by every small betrayal I'd swallowed. When I pulled into my driveway, I already knew I wouldn't stay silent much longer, and the next step began before the sun even set. The law office was quiet, tucked between a bakery and a barber shop. I asked for an early appointment. I didn't want to explain where I was going. Some things don't need permission, only decision. I sat across from Mr. Halperin, the same man who handled Walter's estate after the funeral. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. I liked that about him. "I want to update my will," I said, sliding a folder across the table, "and change the medical proxy. Nolan is no longer a suitable choice." He gave a slow nod, reviewing the document. "I'm also closing the joint account," I added. "It was for convenience, but it's become a liability." He didn't flinch, just kept writing. "And I want to add a clause," I said. "If Nolan attempts to sell, refinance, or alter the deed to my home in any way, whether I'm alive or not, the house automatically transfers to the Chestnut Ridge Public Library." His pen paused mid-stroke. "That's a specific choice. I like that library," I said. By noon, the paperwork was signed. Tidy, legal, unemotional. When I returned home, the sun had shifted. I stepped inside and immediately heard Sharon calling from the living room. "The Wi-Fi isn't working," she said. "Did something change?" I walked to the drawer by the telephone and pulled out a small index card. I handed it to her with a calm smile. "Guest network," I said. Slower, but it should be enough for emails. Sharon took it without speaking. Her mouth opened like she might argue, but she didn't. Nolan stood in the doorway. One hand braced against the frame. He didn't say a word, but his eyes followed me all the way back to the kitchen. I boiled water for tea, hands still trembling slightly, but I didn't mind it this time. The movement felt earned. From the living room, I heard the silence thicken. It wasn't just confusion anymore. It was recognition. They didn't know yet what I'd done. But they would, and by the end of the week, one of them would pay for it. The call came just after 7 in the evening. I was folding towels, something mindless to fill the quiet, when the phone rang. A man's voice on the other end. Young, tense. "Mrs. Wren, I'm calling from Valley Ridge Urgent Care. We have a patient here. Sharon Whitmore. She collapsed earlier this afternoon. Her blood pressure dropped severely." I didn't speak. I waited. "She was found unconscious at your residence. We administered fluids, ran a tox screen. The medication she took was prescribed under your name." I sat down slowly, the towel still warm in my hands. "That's because it was mine," I said. A beat of silence stretched thin across the line. "I see," he murmured. He didn't ask for more. I didn't offer it. Sharon had taken my pills. The ones she scratched my name off of. The ones meant to control the tremor in my hands. Not her nerves or whatever justification they'd convinced themselves of. When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. Just still. Later that night, Nolan called. No pleasantries. "She's stable," he said. "I know." He hesitated. "Why didn't you say anything?" I stared at the dark window, my reflection faint and unfamiliar. "You didn't ask." I said. He was quiet. I could hear something rustling in the background paperwork. Maybe. His breath came tight, like he was about to argue, but didn't. "She could have died." He finally said, "So could I." He didn't respond to that. Just ended the call with a clipped, "We'll talk later." I set the phone down gently on the table and returned to folding the towels. My fingers trembled slightly on the last corner, but I got it smooth anyway. The next morning, Sharon was gone. The guest room door stood open, the bed stripped, the closet empty. No note, no goodbye. And in that silence, something finally cleared. It was time to take back what was mine. I opened the desk drawer like I had 100 times before. Old receipts, dried pens, a paperclip chain Walter used to fidget with while reading the paper. But beneath all that, folded between 2 envelopes, was the list. I'd started it years ago, back when the little hurt still surprised me. Forgot my birthday, missed my follow-up appointment, canceled lunch but posted a beach photo the same hour, called after asking Kara first, always. "Can we borrow your car for our trip? Can you help us with the deposit?" Never stayed longer than needed, never asked how I was, never noticed when I stopped offering tea. And now, at the bottom, I wrote one last line in the same shaky print. "Gave my medicine to someone else." I read the list once. Then again, not to hurt myself, but to understand, to see it for what it was. Not a single betrayal, but a pattern, a thread running quiet through the years, unraveling in small, constant tugs. I didn't cry. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and lit the list with the flame from the stove. Watched it curl inward and turn to ash in a chipped porcelain bowl. It wasn't forgiveness. It was release. By noon, I had called a cab and arrived at my doctor's office with a small envelope of bills tucked in my purse. I paid in cash. Told them I wanted no automatic pharmacy orders, no electronic notifications, just a printed slip, and my own 2 feet to walk it in. We discussed a new plan, gentler dosage, easier side effects. I could manage it, he said. I left with the prescription folded tightly in my coat pocket. Not once did I think to text Nolan. I didn't tell him the name of the pharmacy or the time of the appointment. He'd stopped asking. I'd finally stopped offering. Back home, I opened the window above the sink and let the cool air drift in. Tomorrow, I'd change the locks. Sharon didn't come back. Not to the house. Not even in a phone call. I heard from a neighbor she moved in with her cousin in the next county. Someone with a guest room and a fondness for boxed wine. It suited her. Kara stopped dropping by. No more surprise visits or sudden reorganizations. No more comments about my spice rack or my outdated curtains. Her messages grew shorter, less frequent. Eventually, they stopped altogether. Nolan lingered in the silence they left behind. He started texting again, short. Awkward things. Need anything from the store? Want me to stop by next week? I replied the same way each time. No, thank you. There was no anger in it, just an answer. And slowly, the house began to feel like mine again. My shoes by the door, my rhythms returning, the tea jars back in order, labels facing out. No gadgets on the counter, no perfume I didn't wear clinging to the hallway. I dusted the shelves I used to avoid, played old jazz records without asking permission, left the porch light off because I liked the dark now. One afternoon, While flipping through Walter's old cookbooks for a lentil recipe, I found a note tucked inside Hearty Midwest Meals, his favorite, because of the chili section. It was folded neatly, yellowed at the edges. In his looping handwriting, "Silence can be a shield, but don't forget your sword." I stood there holding it. The ink barely faded, and let myself smile for the first time in weeks. He always knew how to say just enough. I placed the note in a small glass frame and set it by the kitchen window. That night, I scrolled through my phone and opened my emergency contacts. Nolan's name stared back at me first on the list. Like a default I never questioned. I tapped edit, then I tapped delete. My thumb hovered for only a second before confirming. The list was shorter now, but for the first time, it finally felt right. And just before dawn, I remembered the safe deposit box. A soft morning light rested on my hands as I sat at the kitchen table. The world hushed and slow. I lifted my fingers one by one, watching how they moved. Less shaking now, less struggle. The new pills had settled into my system, not fixing everything, but giving me enough steadiness to feel present in my own skin again. The kettle clicked off behind me. I poured the water over loose tea leaves, letting the steam rise against my face. Warm and familiar. The house was quiet, no footsteps in the hall. No voices drifting from rooms that never belonged to them. Just the creak of old wood and the steady hum of a day beginning. I carried my mug to the table and opened a fresh notebook. Its pages were crisp, untouched. I wrote the title at the top in slow, careful letters. Things I will no longer tolerate. The words looked almost too firm for the gentle space around them. But they belonged there. I let the pen rest for a moment, breathing in the calm, letting the morning settle around me like a blanket. My phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't rush to it. I finished my tea, rinsed the cup, wiped a small drop from the table. When I finally picked up the phone, Nolan's message filled the screen. "Can we come by?" No explanation, no apology, just a request to enter the house he once treated like a revolving door. I stared at the message for a long moment, then pressed the button on the side of the phone until the screen went black. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was chosen. As I returned to the notebook, turned to a new line beneath the title, and wrote with a steady hand, "Letting people back in before they earn it." I closed the notebook, set it neatly beside the kettle, and straightened the chair as I rose. The day was waiting, open and wide. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like it was waiting for me.